The dirt from the saloon floor was still clinging to Grace Vance's knees when she looked up and saw the man standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the harsh afternoon sun of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was 1883, and women who spoke out of turn rarely got second chances. Grace had been working at the Silver Moon Saloon for 3 months, serving drinks and dodging the grabbing hands of rowdy cowhands who came through town. The work was hard and the pay meager, but it kept her fed after her parents died from fever the previous winter. She had no other family, no husband, and no prospects beyond the 4 walls of that smoke-filled establishment. The owner, Marcus Webb, was a hard man who cared only about profit and keeping his customers satisfied, regardless of what that meant for the women who worked for him. That afternoon had started like any other. Grace was wiping down tables when she heard the commotion near the bar. A young woman named Catherine, barely 20 years old and new to the saloon, was backed into a corner by a drunk cattle buyer who had been nursing whiskey since noon. His hands were on her, grabbing at her dress while she tried to push him away, her face pale with fear. "Please, sir, let me go," Catherine pleaded, her voice breaking. The other patrons laughed or looked away. This was common enough, and most people had learned to mind their own business. But Grace felt something inside her snap. She thought of her mother, who had always told her that character was defined by what you did when it mattered most. Grace crossed the room in seconds, grabbing a water pitcher from the nearest table. "Get your hands off her," she said firmly. The cattle buyer turned, his eyes bleary and mean. "This is none of your concern, girl." "I am making it my concern," Grace said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "She asked you to stop." The man laughed, a wet, ugly sound, and reached for Catherine again. Grace did not hesitate. She threw the entire contents of the pitcher into his face, the cold water shocking him into stumbling backward. The saloon went silent. The cattle buyer sputtered and cursed, water dripping from his beard, his face turning purple with rage. Marcus Webb came rushing from the back room, his expression thunderous. "What the hell is going on here?" The cattle buyer pointed a shaking finger at Grace. "That girl assaulted me. I want her fired and arrested." Webb did not even ask for Grace's side of the story. His eyes went from the angry customer to Grace, calculating the cost of lost business. "You are done here, Grace Vance. Get your things and get out. I will not have women causing trouble in my establishment." "He was assaulting Catherine," Grace protested, gesturing to the younger woman who was now crying quietly. "I was protecting her." "I do not care if he was dancing a jig," Webb snapped. "The customer is always right, and you just cost me money. Out. Now." Grace felt her chest tighten with the injustice of it, but she knew there was no point in arguing. She untied her apron, folded it carefully to give her hands something to do, and walked toward the door with her head held high even though her eyes were burning with unshed tears. She had $20 to her name, barely enough for a week's rent at the boarding house, and no idea where her next meal would come from. She pushed through the swinging doors into the bright June heat and immediately collided with the solid chest of the man who had been standing in the doorway. Strong hands steadied her, and she looked up into a pair of steel-gray eyes set in a tanned, weathered face. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He wore dusty trail clothes and a worn leather vest, and there was something in his bearing that suggested he was not a man to be trifled with. "Pardon me, miss," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her bones. "I did not mean to be in your way." Grace stepped back quickly, embarrassed. "No, it was my fault. I was not watching where I was going." The man studied her face for a long moment, and Grace realized he must have been standing there long enough to witness at least part of what had happened inside. She felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Oklahoma sun. "That took courage," he said finally. "What you did in there." Grace blinked, surprised. "It was nothing, just common decency." "Common decency is not so common," the man replied. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "My name is Samuel Irving. I own a cattle ranch about 10 miles north of town. I came in looking for someone to help run my household. My housekeeper retired last month and moved back east to live with her daughter, and the place has been falling apart without her. I need someone to cook, manage supplies, keep the books, that sort of thing. Are you interested?" Grace stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want to offer me a job? You do not even know me." "I know you are willing to stand up for someone weaker when it would have been easier to look away," Samuel said. "I know you are not afraid of angry men twice your size. And I know you need work, seeing as you just got thrown out of that saloon for doing the right thing. That is enough for me." Grace's mind raced. The offer seemed too good to be true, and her mother had always warned her about things that seemed too good to be true. But there was something solid and trustworthy about Samuel Irving, something in the directness of his gaze and the quiet confidence in his stance. "I should tell you," she said carefully, "I am not married, and I have no family. Some people might consider it improper for me to work on a ranch owned by a single man." Samuel nodded. "That is a fair concern. I have a foreman named Tom who lives in the bunkhouse with several ranch hands. My aunt visits regularly and stays for weeks at a time. And you would have your own private room in the main house with a lock on the door. I give you my word that you would be treated with complete respect. But if you are uncomfortable with the arrangement, I understand." Grace thought about her dwindling funds, about the boarding house room she could barely afford, about the way Marcus Webb had thrown her out without a second thought. She thought about Catherine's terrified face, and the way none of the men in that saloon would have lifted a finger to help her. And she looked at Samuel Irving, this stranger who had witnessed her at her lowest moment and offered her a lifeline instead of judgment. "I accept," she said. "When do I start?" "Right now, if you are willing," Samuel said. "We can stop by wherever you are staying to collect your belongings, and I will take you out to the ranch. I will pay you $40 a month plus room and board. That is more than fair, I think." Grace nearly gasped. $40 was more than she had made in 2 months at the saloon. "That is very generous." "Good work deserves good pay," Samuel said simply. He gestured toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses at the edge of the street. "Shall we?" An hour later, Grace was seated beside Samuel on the wagon bench, her few possessions packed in a worn carpetbag at her feet. They headed north out of Tulsa, following a dusty road that cut through rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Samuel was not much of a talker, Grace discovered, but his silence was comfortable rather than awkward. He pointed out landmarks as they traveled, telling her about the creek that ran through his property and the best places to find wild plums in late summer. Grace found herself relaxing for the first time in months, breathing in the clean air that smelled of prairie grass and possibility. "How long have you owned the ranch?" she asked. 5 years, Samuel replied. "I worked as a trail boss for 10 years before that, saved every penny I could. When the opportunity came to buy this land, I took it. It has been hard work building it up, but it is mine, and that means something." Grace heard the pride in his voice and understood it. She had never owned anything of value in her life, but she could imagine what it must feel like to have something that was truly yours, that you had built with your own hands. "What about you?" Samuel asked. "Where are you from originally?" "I was born in Missouri," Grace said. "My parents brought me to Oklahoma Territory when I was 14. They wanted to start fresh, build a new life. They opened a small general store in Tulsa and we were happy for a while. But then last winter, they both caught fever. They died within days of each other." "I am sorry," Samuel said, and there was genuine sympathy in his voice. "That must have been hard." "It was," Grace admitted. She had not talked about it with anyone, not really, but something about Samuel's quiet presence made it easier. "The store had debts I did not know about. When they died, everything was sold to pay what was owed. I was left with nothing. That is how I ended up at the saloon. It was the only work I could find." "Well, you are done with that now," Samuel said firmly. "You will have honest work and a safe place to live. I promise you that." They crested a hill, and Samuel pointed ahead. "There it is. The Irving Ranch." Grace looked out over the valley spread before them and felt her breath catch. The ranch house was a solid 2-story structure built from timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Beyond it, she could see a large barn, several outbuildings, and a bunkhouse. Cattle grazed in the pastures, and she could make out the shapes of horses in a corral near the barn. It was beautiful in a practical, hard-working way, a place that had been built to last. As they approached, several men emerged from the barn, and Samuel raised a hand in greeting. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down, then turned to help Grace descend. His hands were strong and warm around her waist, and Grace felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach at the contact. A weathered man in his 50s approached, removing his hat as he came. "Boss, I did not expect you back so soon." "Tom, this is Grace Vance," Samuel said. "She is going to be running the household. Grace, this is Tom Henderson, my foreman. He keeps this place running when I am too stubborn to listen to good sense." Tom grinned and extended his hand. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Vance. Lord knows this place needs a woman's touch. The boss here has been trying to cook for himself, and it has been a disaster." "I heard that," Samuel said, but there was humor in his voice. "Grace, why do not you go inside and get settled? Tom and I need to check on the cattle in the north pasture, but I will be back before supper. There is food in the pantry if you are hungry, and feel free to explore. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right." Grace nodded, suddenly nervous now that the moment had arrived. Samuel must have seen it in her face because he gave her an encouraging smile. "You will be fine," he said softly. "I am glad you are here." Then he and Tom were heading toward the barn, their voices carrying on the evening breeze as they discussed ranch business. Grace picked up her carpetbag and climbed the porch steps, her hand trembling slightly as she opened the front door. The interior of the house was dim and cool after the heat outside. Grace found herself in a large living area with a stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and windows that let in the fading sunlight. To the left was a dining area, and beyond that, a kitchen. To the right, a staircase led to the second floor. Everything was well made and sturdy, but Samuel had not been exaggerating about needing help. Dust covered most surfaces, dishes were piled in the kitchen, and the whole place had the slightly neglected air of a home without a woman's care. Grace set down her bag and tied back her hair. She had never been afraid of hard work, and this was her chance to prove herself. She spent the next 2 hours cleaning the kitchen until it gleamed, washing dishes and taking inventory of the pantry. She found flour, dried beans, salt pork, preserved vegetables, and various other supplies. It was enough to make a decent meal. By the time Samuel returned as the sun was setting, Grace had beef stew simmering on the stove and fresh biscuits cooling on the counter. She had also managed to tidy the living area and light lamps against the gathering darkness. Samuel stopped in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "I did not expect all this," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "It smells wonderful." "It is just stew," Grace said, suddenly shy. "Nothing fancy." "It is better than anything I have managed in weeks," Samuel assured her. He washed his hands at the kitchen pump and helped her set the table. They sat down across from each other, and for a moment there was an awkward silence. Then Samuel said a simple grace, thanking God for the food and for Grace's safe arrival, and they began to eat. The stew was good, hearty and filling, and Samuel ate with obvious appreciation. "Tell me about the ranch," Grace said, wanting to fill the quiet. "How many head of cattle do you run?" Samuel looked pleased by her interest. "About 800 right now. We drive them to market in Kansas twice a year. I have 6 regular hands plus Tom, and we hire extra men for the drives. It is good land here, plenty of water and grass. The cattle thrive." "It must be satisfying," Grace said, "building something like this." "It is," Samuel agreed. "Though it can be lonely too. I lost my parents when I was young, like you. No siblings. For a long time the work was enough, but lately I have been thinking it would be nice to have someone to share it with." He said it casually, but Grace felt the weight of the words. She looked at him across the table, at his strong hands wrapped around his coffee cup, at the tired lines around his eyes that spoke of long days and hard work. He was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way, and there was a kindness in him that she had not expected to find. "I am glad you offered me this job," she said quietly. "I do not know what I would have done otherwise." "I am glad you accepted," Samuel replied, meeting her eyes. "I have a feeling you are exactly what this place needs." Over the following weeks, Grace settled into a rhythm at the Irving ranch. She woke before dawn to start breakfast for Samuel and the hands, managed the household accounts, kept the house clean, and prepared 3 meals a day. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and she found herself happier than she had been in years. Samuel was a good employer, and a better man than she had known. He treated her with unfailing respect, asked her opinion on household decisions, and often sat with her in the evenings after supper, talking about the ranch or the world beyond it. Grace learned that he was 28, 3 years older than her 25 years, and that he had a quiet sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable. She also learned that he was fiercely protective of those he cared about, and had a reputation in Tulsa for being fair but firm in his business dealings. The ranch hands were friendly and respectful, tipping their hats when they saw her, and thanking her profusely for the good meals she provided. Tom's wife, Martha, visited regularly and quickly became a friend, teaching Grace the best ways to preserve food and sharing gossip from town. But it was Samuel who occupied most of Grace's thoughts. She found herself watching for him during the day, listening for his footsteps on the porch, looking forward to their evening conversations. She noticed little things about him: the way he was gentle with the horses, how he always made sure his men were paid fairly, the careful way he repaired things around the ranch rather than replacing them. He was patient and thoughtful, and Grace felt herself drawn to him in ways that both excited and frightened her. One evening in late July, after a particularly hot day, Grace was sitting on the porch trying to catch a breeze when Samuel joined her. He had bathed after the day's work and smelled of soap and shaving cream. He sat down in the chair beside hers, stretching out his long legs with a satisfied sigh. "This is my favorite time of day," he said, looking out over the land as the last light faded from the sky. "When the work is done and everything is quiet." "It is beautiful here," Grace agreed. "I never imagined I would live somewhere like this." Samuel was quiet for a moment, then said, "Grace, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? What happened at the saloon, I mean?" If you had just kept your head down, you would still have that job. Your life might be easier." Grace considered the question. "No," she said finally. "I do not regret it. Catherine needed help and I was in a position to give it. Besides, if I had not been thrown out, I never would have come here. I never would have met you." She had not meant to say that last part, and she felt her cheeks flush in the darkness. But Samuel reached over and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. "I am glad you did meet me," he said softly. "These past weeks, having you here, it has changed everything. The house feels like a home now, and I find myself thinking about you when I should be thinking about cattle and fence repairs." Grace's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Samuel, I know it has only been a few weeks," he continued, "and I do not want to rush you or make you uncomfortable, but I need you to know that my feelings for you go beyond employer and employee. I care about you, Grace, more than I probably should." Grace turned to face him fully, her hand still clasped in his. "I care about you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to because I thought it would be improper or complicated, but I cannot help it. You are a good man, Samuel Irving, and being here with you feels right in a way nothing else ever has." Samuel stood, pulling her gently to her feet. They were close now, close enough that Grace could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. In answer, Grace rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but then Samuel's arms came around her and pulled her close, and Grace felt something inside her ignite. She had been kissed before, fumbling attempts by boys who did not matter, but this was different. This was Samuel, and kissing him felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it is fast, but I do. I love you, Grace Vance." "I love you too," Grace replied, tears gathering in her eyes. "I love you so much it scares me." "Do not be scared," Samuel murmured, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips again. "We will figure this out together. I want you to stay here, not as an employee, but as the woman I am courting. I want to marry you, Grace, if you will have me. I want to build a life with you, a real life." Grace pulled back to look at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt, but all she saw was sincerity and love. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I will marry you." Samuel laughed, a joyful sound that rang out across the prairie, and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing too. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and Grace knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Tulsa, with Tom and Martha as witnesses, and half the town in attendance. Grace wore a new dress of pale blue cotton that Martha had helped her sew, and Samuel wore his best suit, his hair slicked back and his eyes shining with happiness. The local minister performed the ceremony in the small church, and when Samuel kissed his bride, everyone cheered. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed an army. The ranch hands had decorated the barn with wildflowers, and someone produced a fiddle, and soon there was dancing and laughter under the stars. Grace danced with Samuel, with Tom, with several of the hands, but always she came back to her husband, drawn to him like a magnet. Late in the evening, as the party continued around them, Samuel pulled Grace aside and led her toward the house. "I have something to show you," he said, his eyes twinkling with a secret. He took her upstairs, past her old room, to the master bedroom at the end of the hall. Grace had cleaned it weeks ago, but had never been back inside. Now Samuel opened the door and lit a lamp, and Grace gasped. The room had been transformed. The bed was covered with a new quilt in shades of blue and green, and there were fresh curtains at the windows. A beautiful oak dresser stood against one wall, and on top of it was a framed photograph of Grace's parents that she thought had been lost. "How did you?" Grace began, tears filling her eyes. "I went to the man who bought out your parents' store," Samuel explained. "I bought back some of your mother's things. I know how much you missed them. I thought you might want to have them here in our home." Grace threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Samuel held her close, stroking her hair. "You are my wife now, Grace. Your happiness is my happiness. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make you smile." And he did. The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and deep joy. Grace took over complete management of the household, and under her care, the ranch flourished. She kept meticulous books, managed supplies efficiently, and ensured that the hands were well fed and content. Samuel expanded the herd, bought more land, and built a new barn. Together, they made the Irving Ranch one of the most successful operations in the territory. But more than the success, there was love. Samuel and Grace were partners in every sense of the word. He consulted her on major decisions, and she learned the cattle business inside and out. They worked side by side, and at night they fell into bed exhausted but happy, wrapped in each other's arms. In the spring of 1885, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She told Samuel over breakfast one morning, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, wonder, and finally pure joy, before he leaped from his chair and picked her up, spinning her around just as he had the night he proposed. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Grace, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Grace asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Samuel replied, kissing her soundly. "You have given me everything, Grace. A home, a partnership, love, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. Grace was sick for the first few months, and the Oklahoma heat that summer was brutal. But Samuel was attentive and protective, insisting she rest more and take on fewer heavy tasks. Martha visited regularly to help, and the ranch hands tiptoed around Grace like she was made of glass, which she found both touching and amusing. In November, after a long and difficult labor, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James Samuel Irving, and from the moment Samuel held his son for the first time, Grace knew their lives had changed forever. Samuel was a devoted father, waking for night feedings, changing diapers, and spending hours simply staring at his son in wonder. "He has your eyes," Samuel said one evening as they sat together in the nursery, watching James sleep in his cradle. "And your stubbornness," Grace replied with a smile. "He refused to come into this world easily." Samuel laughed softly and pulled Grace against his side. "Thank you," he said, "for all of this, for taking a chance on me that day in Tulsa, for being brave enough to defend someone who needed help. If you had not done that, if I had not seen your courage, we never would have found each other." Grace thought back to that day, to the fear and uncertainty she had felt when Marcus Webb threw her out of the saloon. She thought about how Samuel had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not even known to say, offering her not just a job but a future. "I would do it again," she said firmly. "Every single moment that led me to you, I would do it again without hesitation." The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere and adored his mother with a fierce protectiveness. When he was 3, Grace gave birth to twin girls, Elizabeth and Rose, who had their mother's dark hair and their father's gray eyes. The house was full of laughter and noise, of scraped knees and bedtime stories, of family dinners and Sunday picnics. Samuel proved to be as devoted to his children as he was to his wife. He taught James to ride almost before the boy could walk, and he was endlessly patient with the twins' questions and games. Grace watched him with their children and fell in love with him all over again, seeing in him not just her husband but the father she had always hoped her children would have. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1890, the Irving Ranch was one of the largest in the territory, employing 15 men year-round and twice that during cattle drives. Samuel had built a new, larger bunkhouse, expanded the house to accommodate their growing family, and bought adjoining land from a neighbor who was retiring. They were not wealthy by the standards of the eastern cities, but they were comfortable and secure, with money in the bank and a future that looked bright. But it was not the success or the prosperity that mattered most to Grace. It was the quiet moments, Samuel's hand finding hers across the dinner table, the way he still kissed her goodbye every morning before heading out to work, the sound of their children's laughter echoing through the house. It was the life they had built together, brick by brick, season by season, year by year. One evening in the fall of 1892, Grace and Samuel sat on the porch as they had so many times before, watching the sun set over their land. The children were in bed, the house was quiet, and there was a crispness in the air that promised winter was coming. "Do you remember the day we met?" Samuel asked, his arm around Grace's shoulders. "Every detail," Grace replied, leaning into him. "You were standing in the doorway of the saloon, and the sun was behind you, so I could barely see your face. I thought you were just another cowboy passing through. And I thought you were the bravest woman I had ever seen," Samuel said, "willing to lose everything to do what was right. I knew in that moment that I wanted you in my life, though I did not dare hope you would end up as my wife." "I am glad you dared," Grace said softly. "I am glad you saw something in me worth taking a chance on." "Grace, look at me," Samuel said, turning her to face him. His eyes were serious, his expression tender. "You were not the only one who was saved that day. I was alone, building an empire with no one to share it with, no reason beyond my own pride. You gave me purpose. You gave me love and family and a reason to come home at the end of the day. You saved me just as much as I helped you." Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks, and Samuel wiped them away with his thumb. "I love you," she whispered. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Samuel replied, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness of their first kiss and all the kisses since. "Forever, Grace. You and me forever." The years continued to unfold like pages in a book, each one bringing new challenges and joys. James grew into a fine young man who shared his father's love of the land and his mother's strong moral compass. When he was 18, he took on more responsibility at the ranch, working alongside Samuel to manage the expanding operation. The twins, Elizabeth and Rose, were inseparable and bright as buttons, attending the new school that had opened in Tulsa, and bringing home books and ideas that kept the household lively. In 1895, Grace gave birth to their youngest child, a daughter they named Catherine, after the young woman Grace had defended all those years ago in the saloon. Samuel held his new daughter and looked at Grace with eyes full of love and pride. "Our family is complete," he said softly. "4 beautiful children and the love of my life. I could not ask for more." Grace smiled, exhausted but happy. "It all started with one moment of courage," she said, "one decision to stand up for what was right." "And thank God you made it," Samuel replied, kissing her forehead. "Thank God you were brave." As the new century approached, Grace and Samuel sat together one evening, now in their early 40s but still deeply in love. James was courting a nice girl from town. The twins were planning to attend a teaching college in Missouri, and little Catherine was already showing signs of her mother's fierce independence. "We have had a good life," Samuel said, looking around at the home they had built, at the legacy they were leaving for their children. "The best life," Grace agreed. She thought about the girl she had been in that Tulsa saloon, scared and uncertain, willing to risk everything for a stranger. She thought about Samuel offering her a chance when no one else would, seeing value in her when she barely saw it in herself. "You ever wonder what happened to Catherine?" Samuel asked, as if reading her thoughts. "The girl from the saloon." "I heard she married a banker from Oklahoma City," Grace said. "Martha told me years ago. She has children of her own now, a good life. I like to think that standing up for her that day made a difference, not just for me, but for her too." "I am sure it did," Samuel said. "You changed a lot of lives that day, Grace. Mine most of all." They sat together as the stars came out, comfortable in their silence, in their love, in the life they had created together. The ranch stretched out around them, a testament to hard work and partnership. The house behind them was filled with the evidence of their family, of the love that had started with a simple act of courage and grown into something beautiful and lasting. Grace thought about the Wild West, about the harshness and the danger, about the way women like her had to fight for every bit of dignity and respect. But she also thought about the possibility that existed here, the freedom to build something new, to create a life on your own terms. She had lost everything once, but in losing it, she had found Samuel. She had found home. "Come to bed," Samuel said, standing and offering her his hand. "Tomorrow is a new day, and there is always work to be done." Grace took his hand, as she had taken it that first day in Tulsa when he offered her a job and a future. She rose and let him lead her inside, past the memories and the dreams, into the warmth of their home. In 1901, James married his sweetheart, Annie, and brought her to live at the ranch. Samuel had built them a small house on the property, close enough to the main house for family dinners, but far enough for privacy. When Annie became pregnant with their first child the following year, Grace and Samuel looked at each other and smiled, knowing that the legacy they had built would continue into the next generation. Elizabeth became a teacher, just as she had dreamed, and Rose married a doctor and moved to Tulsa, where she became active in the growing women's suffrage movement. Catherine, at 7 years old, was already declaring she would be the first female rancher in Oklahoma, and neither Grace nor Samuel doubted she would find a way to make it happen. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Samuel surprised Grace with a trip to Kansas City. They had never taken a real honeymoon, too busy with the ranch and the children, but now James was capable of managing things for a week, and Samuel insisted. They stayed in a grand hotel, ate in fancy restaurants, and saw a play at the theater. Grace wore new dresses that Samuel had bought for her, and he wore a suit that made him look distinguished and handsome. But despite the luxury and the excitement of the city, what Grace loved most was walking through the streets with Samuel's arm around her, talking and laughing, remembering their journey together. "I would not trade a single moment," Grace said as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room looking out over the city lights. "Not the hard times, not the struggles, because they led us here." "Neither would I," Samuel agreed, pulling her close. "You are my heart, Grace Irving. You always have been, from the moment I saw you walk out of that saloon with your head held high." They made love that night with all the passion of their youth and all the tenderness of 2 decades together, and Grace knew that this love, this partnership, was the greatest success of her life. When they returned to the ranch, they were greeted by their children and grandchild, by Tom and Martha, who were now in their 70s but still spry, by the ranch hands who had become like family. The house was full of flowers and a welcome home banner, and there was a celebration dinner with all of Grace's favorite foods. Later, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Grace and Samuel sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The Oklahoma night was soft and warm, full of the sounds of cattle and horses of home. "Thank you," Grace said suddenly. Samuel looked at her in surprise. "For what?" "For seeing me that day," Grace said. "For believing in me when I had nothing and no one. For loving me the way you do, completely and forever. For giving me this life, this family, this home. Thank you, Samuel." Samuel was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Grace, you gave me far more than I ever gave you. You took a lonely man with nothing but land and ambition, and you made him into a husband, a father, a better person. You filled my house with love and laughter. You stood beside me through droughts and hard winters, through the birth of our children and the building of our dreams. If anyone should be grateful, it is me." "Then we are both lucky," Grace said, taking his hand. "Lucky to have found each other, lucky to have built this life together." "The luckiest," Samuel agreed, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built an empire not of land and cattle but of love and family and shared dreams. The girl who had been thrown out of a saloon for defending another woman had become a wife, a mother, a partner in every sense of the word. The cowboy who had recognized courage when he saw it had found his match, his equal, his forever love. The years would continue to pass, bringing new joys and new challenges, but Grace and Samuel would face them together, as they always had. Their children would grow and have children of their own, and the Irving ranch would pass down through generations, a legacy of hard work and love. But that night, sitting on the porch with their hands intertwined and their hearts full, Grace and Samuel simply enjoyed the moment. They had built something beautiful together, something that would last long after they were gone. They had taken a single moment of courage and turned it into a lifetime of love. And as the Oklahoma stars wheeled overhead and the prairie wind whispered through the grass, Grace thought that there was no place she would rather be, no life she would rather have lived, no man she would rather have loved than Samuel Irving, the cowboy who had seen her at her worst and offered her his best, who had said those fateful words that changed everything. "That takes courage. Come work for me." From that single moment, from that single act of kindness and recognition, had sprung everything that mattered. Love, family, home, and a happiness so deep and true that it would echo through the generations to come. Grace Vance Irving had been kicked out for defending another woman, and in doing so, she had found her destiny waiting in the doorway of a saloon, backlit by the Oklahoma sun, ready to offer her not just a job but a future, not just employment but love, not just a place to live but a home to cherish forever.